So now we're going to see the three-edge rule in action on another object. And what we're going to do is hop over to Google, or at least I am, and I'm going to look for an image of thumbtacks. And I found a decent one earlier. Yeah, right here. Okay, so I'm going to drag and drop that into my thumbtack folder, which I just made. There we go. Let's hop back over to Maya, and I'll import that into the image plane for the front view. I would like to center one of them on the origin, though. That would make my life a bit easier. I suppose I could have taken this into Photoshop, but it's really not necessary. So I'm going to do that by using the image plane attributes, There we go. Let's reduce the gain a wee bit. And image center, I'm going to hold control and middle click and drag until that is more or less, it looks like I got it right onto the pixel. Look at that. Nice. So that's 7.5 to be exact. I guess it doesn't really matter where it is on the y-axis because that's the axis that we're going to be modeling on. And which leads me to another term that I like to use. I'll call this object a single axis object because it lives on one axis, and in this case the y-axis, and it's cylindrical, so it makes it very easy for me to build this thing. And I will only need to use about maybe 8 different tools, maybe 6 different tools. That would be move and scale, also bevel towards the end, insert edge loop. I'll call them out as I use them, but it really won't take that many tools to make this thing. And having it centered on at least one of the axes makes this really easy. So I'm going to bring in a cylinder. And I'm going to be using an 8-sided cylinder because there are no details being attached to the side of this object. It doesn't have any handles, it doesn't have any creases, it doesn't have any marks or holes or dents. It's a very pristine, perfect object, so an 8-sided cylinder will serve our purposes very, very well. I'm going to translate this into place. Again, I'm still in the front view, by the way. I don't really have to look at it in perspective. I could, but I really don't need to. I'm going to work here in the front view for now. I'll pop back to the perspective view as I need to. I'm going to start off by moving the vertices, and here's the little caveat, if you will, of using Maya. When I'm on the orthogonal viewports, I actually work in vertex mode a lot because they're easy to marquee. Notice that if I try to do this with edges, I can't just get that bottom edge, and double clicking it's just a pain in the butt. It doesn't always work. It's just so easy to select that row of vertices. So I'm going to move those into place. I'm even going to scale them into place. And notice I'm scaling from the center, and here's where I'm going to switch to another view because the newbie out there will accidentally scale it by doing this. They'll grab the x-axis and pull on it, and it looks okay from this view, but take a look at it here. So it is only been adjusted on one axis, so not so good. So make sure that when you're scaling it, you're actually scaling from the center, which is another reason why it's so simple to work from one view in a single axis on this cylindrical object. It's very, very easy to manipulate. So I'm going to translate these straight up on the y-axis. Notice that I'm not grabbing the center of the gizmo for the y-axis movement because I could move to the side a little bit. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to highlight just the y-axis, click and drag it right to the top, and there we go. Decent. So from here, I want to insert some edge loops. I could have done that I hide the attribute editor here. I could have done that way back at the beginning. I could have added some divisions on the height. But it's a little too late for that because I've manipulated this too much. I think it's too late. Yeah, it's way too late. It's going to be all messed up. You can see it's all messed up. So, since I didn't think of that first, I'm going to edit mesh menu. I'm going to tear this off by clicking on this ... line, whatever that is. And I'm going to use, right there, insert edge loop. And it's interactive, more or less. And I'm going to drop one here, and I'm going to drop one here for now. And I'm going to hit Q, and then I'm going to right click and choose vertex. Select those, scale it, translate, scale, tuck those in. These can be scaled, scaled out, insert edge loop, and while that edge loop's still selected, I'll just hit scale, bring those in. Alright, pretty decent. And in order to get this bell curve and a little bit of a bell on the underneath here as well, I'm going to insert another edge loop here about midway. And I can get this exactly 50%. So here this is kind of an arbitrary position, but I could get that at exactly 50% by using the insert edge loop option box and check mark multiple edge loops and drag it to only one. And what it'll do is it'll divide. I can't drag it. You can see I can't move it. And it'll divide it exactly 50%. And I'll also scale that outward. Now, I could try and match this by adding multiple edge loops and try and get a nice clean contour, or I could just hit number 3 on my keyboard and try and get some idea of what it's going to be. But you can see even when I hit number 3 on the keyboard, it's really not ready for subdivision surfaces. It simply doesn't have enough sets of 3 edges in order to control these tight changes here and here. So I'm going to have to take a little time to do that. I'm going to take this moment to switch to the perspective view, and I'm going to select all of the, hit number 5 actually, I'm going to select all of the faces on the bottom side, so I'm going to marquee that. And notice I get all the faces on the bottom plus a few I don't want. I can control drag over those to deselect them. And you can see I can confirm my selection. So imagine that in the front view. So I'm going to select everything and then control marquee what I don't want. And even though it just looks like a red line here, it is in fact all the polygons selected on the bottom. So back to the front view. I'm going to extrude that set. And you know what? I might as well look at this in perspective so that you can see what I'm talking about. So let me hide the grid so that's out of the way. And where is extrude? There it is, extrude. And I'm going to offset. Well, apparently I'm not going to offset. Here we go. Select it, extrude. Here it is in the channel box. Offset, there we go. And let's use the virtual slider. There we go. So I'm going to squeeze that in. So what I've done is I've created this poly loop around the perimeter of the triangles, and I'm squeezing those triangles in smaller, much smaller. And those triangles are going to become the metal pin, the metal shaft. And I'm going to select them again. So I'm going to go to face, hit Q, select all those faces, and this time I'm going to use shrink. Shift less than, and shrink it down to that selection right there. Hit number 4. Okay, and I'm going to extrude again, and translate again, and right down to the end. And I'm going to scale those inward. Notice I'm ignoring this curvature right here. I'm just going for the end goal, the end shape. And notice I'm not doing this thing that I've seen novices do where I have to get rid of this reference image. Just give me a moment here. Select camera, image plane, and check mark this looking through camera. There we go. Hide the attribute editor. Let's just expand this so I can focus on what I'm trying to teach you here. So I'm going to select all the vertices here at the bottom. Okay, so at the very tip. And I see novices do this where they'll translate this one down, and they think that that's sharp. But the reality is that the more you try to sharpen this, the less light will hit it. So when I go to subdivision surfaces, or even without subdivision surfaces, you end up with these artifacts, for one thing. So it just looks kind of funny. It's actually dark instead of having that pristine shine that you would expect the edge of the sword to have. So don't do this. You actually want to have polygons at the tip. You just need to squeeze them really, really, really small. So having a very tightly scaled down tip is ideal. Alright, so moving right along, I'm going to insert an edge loop here. Where are you? There you are. Insert edge loop. And it's still set to 50%. That's okay. And I'm going to hit W to translate that edge and just move it down a bit. And then maybe insert yet another one. So I'll hit G to repeat the last tool, and I'll hit W again to move it down, and then R to scale out a bit, so we more or less have that pin. So I could even tuck the pin, the metal part, into the plastic. So let's go to the perspective view for that. I'm going to select all of the faces, marquee. All of marquee just has to touch it. And like an appendage on a character's hand, I can extrude the entire appendage to add more edge loops to the base. So I'm going to go to extrude and then translate in world space, W, and tuck it into the surface. I'm going to hit number 4 for wireframe so you can see what's going on. So I'm actually tucking it into the surface. So I could leave an edge loop behind, meaning I could just tuck it in a little bit and then extrude again and then translate again and tuck it in a little bit further. Maybe a lot further. Maybe just a little bit. It is a solid plastic. We won't be able to see it in there anyway. So what I've done is I've added, I have 2 edge loops. I need a third one. So I've got one on the inside, the actual edge, and now I need a third one on the outside. So I'm going to go to Insert Edge Loop and drop one right. Excuse me, I need to go to the Insert Edge Loop option box. Turn relative distance from edge back on so that I can interactively place that. There we go. Something like that. So now when I hit number 3, you notice how it's very, very tight right in here. It has a good look to it. Let me hit Q to drop out of that. Let me hit 5 to turn on shaded. Let me go to object mode. There we go. So that looks very clean in here. And the tip looks, well, reasonably sharp. I could tighten it down further. Alright, so for the remaining details, let's go to the front viewport, turn off subdivision surfaces, number 1, and let's insert a second one here. That would look nice. Insert an edge loop, tap R to scale it, push that out, double click that one, there we go, something like that. And let's also go in here, double click this one, scale it in, maybe translate it, where is it? W, there it is. Translate it in a little bit, maybe translate this one in a little bit, something like that. And then let's take a look at the top too. Let's add a little detail there, that could look nice. Let's select all the faces on the top. Actually, let's deselect all faces by doing that, by selecting everything. There we go. And hit F to frame up my selection, to confirm my selection. I'm going to extrude that, and I'm going to offset it inward just a wee bit, and just translate it down just a wee bit, just a little divot there at the top. That could look nice. Okay, so lastly I want to put in my supporting edges and following my 3 edge rule. So I need supporting edges on this edge loop, so I'll double click it. I need supporting edges on this one, shift double click. If it's hard to click on that line, which it is for me sometimes, you can go up to shading, thicker lines, and set that to maybe 2 for now. And that will make it just a little bit easier to click on them. Okay, and let's do it on this one, and this one, and this one. Okay, and then I'm going to go to Edit Mesh, Bevel Option Box. Let's start off with a value of 0.25. Apply. And let's hit number 3 to preview it. That's not bad. Let's take a look at the reference, see if we're keeping to it. So the subdivision surfaces did pull it in a little bit. I can see that. So let's fix that. Let's adjust it. Let's adjust the top here a bit. So let's grab those vertices and scale them out. Let's scale them out on 2 axes, not all 3. Notice how it's getting larger as well on the y-axis. Let's just control click the y-axis. That's better. That's good. The bell. Let's do the whole bell. And again, control clicking the y-axis. And this one as well. Just a wee bit there. A little bit there. A little bit there. And you get the idea. You can refine it. Control clicking on the y-axis just to push that out a bit. And let's double check it in perspective and go to object mode and make sure we don't have any weird dents and such. So that's what I thought would happen right here. That's because of that extra edge. Yeah, see. So that's okay. I will go to shift double click, there we go, and just push that out a bit just until that curvature is just right. And let's check the top. I think it happened up here too. Yeah, right here. Let's grab this one and just again push that out a little bit so that we're controlling that curvature right there a bit better. Number 3, object mode. Pretty good, decent, not too bad. In the next section we're going to separate this thing into its 2 different materials, but I hope that this kind of shows you what I'm thinking about when I'm laying down my key edges, and then I'm laying down supporting edges, and ultimately I'm looking for 3 for every time I need a control area or a detail area. Okay, we'll see you in the next one. Alright, so from here I want to elaborate a little bit more, get your feet wet with a little bit more lights, a little bit more camera, just a dabbling in shaders, maybe a bit of texture, just some quick fun things, maybe even a little bit of Viewport 2.0 for those of you who had the video cards to support that. Alright, so let's start out by ripping this object apart now that we've put it all together. Meaning, I want to separate the pin into its unique material parts. So we've got plastic and we've got metal, and I want them to be individual objects, and then I want to create a hierarchy and group them and duplicate it and other things. So let's start with the separating part. So I'm going to select it and turn off subdivision surfaces for no other reason than just speed and ease of use. It always computationally heavy to work with subdivision surfaces. I'm going to start with the faces of the pin and switch to wireframe to make sure I have all of the polygons on the inside, and it appears that I do. I'm going to ignore these, that can be part of the plastic. And I'm going to come right over here to Mesh and Extract. There is an option box for this. it says separate the extracted and an offset value, which is kind of fun, but not necessary right now. I'll hit apply. And notice I have a highlighted in white object and highlighted in green object, which is your visual cue that there's two things in the scene now. I'll hit Q to drop out of that tool. I'm going to click this little preset, viewport preset, and notice that I have automatically a group with two objects underneath it. I'm going to select that group, and I'm going to go under Edit and choose Delete by Type, History. Now, actually, before I click that, let me show you something. This history right here underneath the channel box, I really didn't say anything about it earlier. But this is all the stuff that I've done to this cylinder since the very beginning polycylinder input. And this one is got the same amount of inputs because it came from the same object. And the very last one is the most recent thing that I've done here. At the top of the stack is the most recent thing that I've done. That's the poly separate. I'm going to select that group, which selects all the objects underneath it as well, and I'm going to go to Edit, Delete by Type, History. A couple of things have happened. One, that ghost object that was sitting underneath here is gone. Two, the shape input history is gone. We are now locked down. This is what we get, so we can move forward from here. I'm going to rename this my plastic, metal, and rename the group thumbtack. Number 5, for the shaded view, I'm going to right click on the plastic bit and choose Assign New Material, and I'm going to assign a Phong material, full diffuse. I'm going to assign a color. You know what? Let's see if we can pick. I've never done this. I'm sure it's incredibly easy. Oh, I love it. Okay, so picker, pick, and now I have that color. Back to perspective. Oh, brilliant. Okay, and then the specular cosine power. Well, you know, that's just really how sharp it is. So if I hit number 3, that's really how sharp this highlight is right here. And I really won't know what that is until I get a decent light in here. Specular color, yeah, let's just increase that all the way to white. And reflectivity, well, we don't really need that, but we could have a wee bit of it. And I like diffuse to be all the way up so I'm getting my full impact of color. Although some may argue with me against that. Anyway, for the metal bit, a new material again. Blinn. Maybe a bit of blue. Just a hint. And diffuse, and also you could toy with the eccentricity and specular color and such to enjoy that, but it seems to have a nice metallic sheen to it to begin with. That's done, and now I want to bring in a ground plane so I have something to cast shadows against, and I'm going to use the polyplane attribute here, width and height. I've got my speedometer turned on low so I can increase the width and height, or I could turn on a little bit larger here, or just enter a number. I could do that too. 200, 250, that sounds fine. Maybe a couple of divisions. I've gotten into the habit of using a lot of divisions on the ground for different displacement or perturbation effects. No other reason really. Although it will make, divisions would make the shadow map shadows show up a little bit better. Let's prove that. Under lights, spotlight again, T on the keyboard, number 7 on the keyboard. While we have the channel box on, use depth map shadows is set to off. Let's set that to on. Let's just type in 1 for on. And in the viewport, let's take this to for those of you who have the video cards to support it, we can use Viewport 2.0, which is very sexy in my opinion. And let's turn on shadows. Again, this has to be done in the viewport and in the light. So in the light, I turned on the depth matte shadows, and in the viewport, I turned on shadows. I'm also going to turn on hardware texturing, which will allow me to do things like this. I'm going to give the ground plane a new material, and I'm going to give it, yeah, let's just give it Lambert, which is no specular highlight, just colored. And let's give the color a texture, so hit the checker mark icon, and let's just do the classic checker. And underneath the place 2D texture, I can increase the repetition. Let's do like 20 by 20. And now I've got a checkered floor, which is, I suppose, is decent. Even with Viewport 2.0, I could, let's just toy around with this a little bit. Waste your time just a little bit. Reflected color, I'm going to put an environment on this. I learned this recently, it's pretty cool. And then for the image of that environment, I'm going to texture that with more or less the same texture I just used for the checker. So, you know, so that it shows up in there. It's kind of a cheap trick, but you know what? I just don't like it. Well, I kind of like it, but it's not very true to the form of the scene. So here, I'm going to remove it. Here's how you remove it. I'm going to go up with this little button, and then up again. I'm going to right click on reflected color and choose break connection, and bam, it removes it. So, well, now you know how to remove it. I'm going to hit number 5 on the keyboard to get out of that view, to get out of that, I think you know what I'm trying to say. I'm going to select one of these objects. I'm going to hit up on the keyboard, my up arrow, and that selects the group. And then I'm going to duplicate Control D, the object, and W to translate to the side. And now I have a second pin, and I can prove that I have a second pin. If I hit 8 on my keyboard for my outliner, I can see I have a thumbtack here with another thumbtack right there with all of the objects underneath. It's very nice. And now I can take the time to even rotate or pivot or change the location of this. And I could hit home, sorry, Macintosh, insert, and translate the position of the pivot point, insert again, and now I can rotate from that point. So now I can actually just lay this down on the floor like that. It's pretty nice. Let's go to the side view. And I apologize for going a little too quickly there, but all I'm doing is I'm just tapping the spacebar, moving my cursor, tapping the spacebar to get the other view. Another way I get different views is I hold down the spacebar and I left click and I hold right here on top of the word Maya, and it gives you a radial menu where you can quickly swap to the other views, which is nice, I suppose. I use that one a bit. And let's just translate these and do a little rotation. There we go. So it's like resting on the ground, and maybe the other one, again, hit the up arrow key and maybe just drive that into the ground. And let's use, hold on W, left click and hold, let's use object space. So I can just drive it right down to the ground according to the rotation that I've set. And for some odd reason, my image plane showed up again. Oh, there it goes, it's gone. Okay, so then from this orientation, I can, again, hit the up arrow key, duplicate that object, and even make another one, maybe rotate it around. Okay, you get the idea. I'm just laying out the scene, making something pretty, sort of. And I can frame that up, go right up here to View, Camera Settings, Resolution Gate, 640 by 480. I can go to the resolution, the render settings, and set the resolution. I'd like to use something a little bit more cinematic, like HD. Where is that? Yeah, this one, HD 720. And then underneath render options, out of habit, turn this off, close, and number 7. There we go. And let's, where's my hardware rendering? Turn that back on. Maybe a backlight, that would be nice, or some kind of bounce light. So let's fake that. Let's create another, sorry about that, another light. Let's make a point light this time. I know people like Jeremy Byrne wouldn't really use a point light like this, but I can get away with it because I don't work at Pixar. So I'm just going to raise this up a bit. And I could even look at this from the top view. Where's my light? Okay, there's my key light. So let's just put this, yeah, let's put it over here, and let's put the key light T. Let's put the key light over there, let's say. Check that in my camera. It's taking a snapshot of it, and it's got this low quality shadow because of the shadow map. I suppose we could investigate that. If I hit 8 and bring up my light, my key light, instead of shadow maps, well, I could use shadow maps. I just increase this resolution considerably. That would improve it a little, or not. Apparently I don't know what I'm doing, but you know what? I do know what I'm doing with ray trace. So I could increase the light radius and increase the ray depth. Let's increase the rays to like 8 and take a picture of that. And there's more time to talk about rendering later, but you can see that that's pretty decent quality shadows, and I could blur those out further on the edges and get some reasonable look to it. I could even use an area light, and of course that will significantly increase my render time. But it does tend to have a nice look to it. And here's that bit of blurring on the edges that the light radius really had an impact on. And there's lots of other swell things to do in lighting, which really isn't the key right now. But this should get your appetite going for more. Alright, we'll see you in the next one, where we take this single axis object and we go from just an exterior shell to having an interior shell as well, and how to handle that, and the multiple ways that we can solve that by making cups and mugs and other various cylindrical objects. Now that I've come this far with the pin, I'd like to take a moment before moving on to the next object to explain some subdivision surface issues. I'm going to switch to a different camera and frame this up. And what I'm looking at right now, what I'm looking for, are these facets that show up around the edges of my cylindrical objects. They show up most often they show up in these very round organic objects, and what you're seeing is the division level in the preview display, so the preview division level of this subdivision surface. Now that's set to be exactly the same type of faceting when it renders. So render division level is set to use the same thing because I'm using this check mark right here. By default this is check marked. My recommendation is to turn that off when you're looking to do a high quality render, and even set this to a level of 3. So when you take this image, render, you'll see that this edge right here will be much more pristine, versus if I drop this back down to 2, and let's compare that. So I'm going to cache this image by hitting this little green button right here. That'll save it temporarily, and we'll render again. And you can see There we go. And you can see here a clear faceting of those divisions. And depending on the kind of product that you're making or image that you're trying to achieve, you probably don't want this. I would say most of the time you don't want to see this unless you're producing a previs. You know, this I would say this is okay in a pre-visualization, but certainly not in your final render, and certainly not for product rendering or commercial spots, things like that. So let's compare the two. So here it is with the level 3, very clean, and then here it is at level 2. I'm just scrolling this bar back, and here it is at level 2. Another thing to consider is something I was talking about earlier about converting to polygons. So when you're looking at this number here for preview division level, it is actually a way to control how the smooth mesh preview conversion to polygons works. If you remember, that tool was right here under modify, convert. This one right here, smooth mesh preview to polygons. So this number, preview division level, is this, it controls how much is being divided. So let's say this one's set to level 1 and I click the smooth mesh preview. So now I no longer have subdivision surfaces, but I have polygons. So you can see this is a reasonable way to increase the complexity of my mesh and stepping away from subdivision surfaces. And I could do that with this one at level 2. You can see it's a fair bit higher in density. And then this one I could even set to level 3, which is overkill, but I just want to prove it to you. So this is a 3 conversion, this is a level 2 conversion, this is a level 1 conversion. And again, depending on the kind of detail that you need to attach to these objects, like maybe you had to riddle it with holes or something like that, or maybe you had to run soft body dynamics on it and melt it, or maybe you had to have more accurate rigid body collisions and you needed to just increase the geometry a little bit. These are all good reasons to use this tool. And of course you still have the option to use subdivision surfaces even after having done this conversion, although you may not need it at all. Alright, so just keep that in mind, that you can control the preview level different from the render level. The primary reason for that is so that your video card can handle lower amounts of detail, whereas your CPU can handle higher amounts of detail for rendering. And then you can also have this conversion option if you need to add detail, or you simply want to abandon subdivision surfaces altogether. I'm going to do this again through the front view, image plane, import the image. This time I have a cup reference that I grabbed from online, and I'm going to hit open. Okay, and I'm also going to check looking through camera. I'm going to reduce the gain like I do normally, and I'll just leave it right where it is. So again, I'm just going to use this for exactly what it is, just refer to it, just reference it. Let's get a cylinder, and I want to just look at the front view, and I'm going to start this by again going to vertex mode like I did with the pin. I'm going to translate these vertices, something about there, and maybe scale them up. Same thing here, translate, oops, just the y-axis, and scale those out a bit. Now when I look at this image, it's curved right here. That's because of the I can't think of the word, the lens, because of the lens of the camera, the focal length, that's it, because of the focal length of the camera. So it's not a true orthogonal view, so that's why mine's going to be square on and theirs is going to be curved. So it's going to be bowed down here as well. So I'm quite alright with that in an orthogonal view. And I could perhaps adjust this image just a wee bit. Maybe adjust it on the x-axis so that it's centered more or less. Yeah, that looks better. And okay, so it's really quite simple. I chose a simple geometry and I want to do a simple interior, and I'm going to do that by selecting all of the faces at the top deselect the ones I don't want, and I'm going to extrude them. Edit mesh, extrude, and I'm going to offset that inward just a wee bit, and that's the actual width of the wall that's going to be the inside wall of this object. And I'm going to extrude it again, so I'm just going to hit G to extrude again, and then I'm going to translate this down. G is a nice shortcut because it repeats the last tool you used. And I'm going to tap the space bar and hit R for scale. I'm going to squeeze this in, and I'm eyeballing this. It's all I'm doing. I just want to see that this edge is parallel to this edge. Two parallel edges giving me an eyeballed thickness, or maybe even squeeze it in a little bit, make it thicker at the base. Whatever pleases you. And for the actual round bit on the outside of the cup, I'm going to insert edges. I'm going to insert edge loops, excuse me, and I'm going to do that maybe here, and I'll then hit Q to drop out of that, and then go to faces, select this face, shift double click that face so I have the whole face loop, and I'm going to extrude that one, and I'm going to translate it on its local Z outward a bit. Let's switch back to edges, Q again to drop into the select tool, double click that edge, translate it up a bit just to round it out. Okay, there we go. So that's pretty much it. Other than sharpening up edges using the 3-edge rule, we have more or less the Dixie cup, and I'm using a cylinder with 8 sides, and I can get away with that because I have a very low amount of, I have no detail to attach to the sides. Let's do just a bit of work on the foot. So let's just shift click those. Double check my selection, hit F to frame up my selection, double check it. And I'm going to extrude that again. Oh, here's another way to get to extrude, since I've used it so many times. I'm going to hold down the space bar and go here to recent commands, left click and hold on that, and there's my poly extrude. And it shows me the most recent things that I've done. Pull that in just a wee bit. Again, since it was the last thing I did, I'll hit G, do it again. And just move this in slightly. Check it in the side view. Hit 4 for wireframe. And make sure I'm not intersecting the inside of the cup. And let's just offset that a wee bit, put a little angle on it right there. Okay, simple things that make it look very pleasant. Alright, number 5 again. And I'm going to bevel some edges. So I'm going to go to Edge. Actually, one other thing before I bevel edges. These triangles on the inside. Let's get those too. Very delicately, I'm just clicking. I'm not marqueeing, I'm just clicking. Let's just make sure I have the selection I want. Frame it up. Let's extrude again. I think it was the most recent thing that I did, but I'm not sure. There it is, poly extrude. And offset that, and just squeeze those triangles in nice and small. And let's do that on the bottom. Really, the reason I'm doing this is so that those triangles don't cause any kind of render artifacts when I enable subdivision surfaces. That's pretty much my motivation here. Again, recent commands, poly extrude, and offset those in so those triangles are nice and small. And that'll be just enough to get the job done. I'll then go to edge mode, double click this edge on the inside, bottom edge inside. Let's do the one that's under the lip, not the one that's on the outside of the lip, because I want it to be nice and curvy. So that's why I have these large space here, but I'm going to make these very tight in here. Let's do the one on the outside, the one on the inside of the foot, and the one just on the inside of the foot right there. Okay, so let's drop a bevel on those and see what we get. Let's hit number 4 and confirm our selections. Looks good. And I'll go to the bevel. Again, I'll hit the space bar edit mesh and bevel option box, and let's use a small bevel like a 0.1 because our scene is quite small, my object is quite small, and segments 2 because I want the 3-edge rule. Hit apply, close, and let's take a look at it. Let's hit number 3 and go to object mode and see what we have. So I have facets along here, and that's to be expected from what I explained in the last video, but overall it has a good look to it. I could make additional changes to the foot in here even after doing all of that work. I could even make some changes to the shape of it, maybe bow it out or tuck it in. Let's make some small proportional changes. Let's go to the side view, number 4, number 1 to turn off subdivision surfaces. Let's go to vertex mode. And notice this is going to be a very simple edit. I only have vertices at the top and I have vertices at the bottom. So this should be a very simple edit. I'm just going to scale and hold control and squeeze this in on the y-axis and just taper it a little bit. Look how simple that is. So if for some reason I needed to change that, let's go to the front view and check that. Obviously I don't. I had my proportions correct the first time. Let's just push that back out. But you can see that it is quite easy. And I have nothing to worry about in the middle because it's a more or less a linear interpolation. So now I can go here and spend a little time thinking about, okay, how do I want to match this in my camera? So I can go to perspective, panels, perspective, make a new camera. Let's call this shot 1 again. Simple practices, very useful. And underneath the shape, I'm going to change the focal length to maybe, I don't know, 55. Let's try that. And if I take a look at all 4 views here, and let's just hide the grid in this view so I can just see the image. I would say that, number 3, I would say that that's fair in terms of interpreting it. And you can see the subdivision surfaces has crushed it a bit, squeezed it in. I could scale everything, again control clicking on the y-axis, outward a bit to give it its volume back. And I would say that that's fairly accurate and does the job. And if I just take a look at the camera, my camera, maybe put a ground plane in, scale that up. You can see I have this curve here, which matches my image here, and matches my image here. I'd like to take a moment and explain the manipulator that comes up with extrusion and how it works. So when I select a face and I choose to extrude, I get this gizmo that has all of this manipulator that has all of these tools packed into it. It has scale, it has translation, it has rotation, it has a thickness slider, offset slider, divisions. It also has global or object versus world space in there as well when you tap this little button. And that presents a problem because I'm also using the feature in the preferences that allows me to highlight when I roll my cursor over it, and notice how the center of the manipulator is changing when I roll my mouse over it. And this was catching me off guard earlier, but I finally realized that if I want to scale it, I just roll my mouse over one of the scales, and the center changes to a scale object, to a scale icon, excuse me, the box. And if I want to rotate, I can just hover over the rotation icon, and now I can rotate this. It's very sensitive with this, and the feature I'm talking about is under here in Preferences, under Manipulators, and it was this thing right here, Highlight Manipulation Handles. And well, it's just made it a little weird. So to work around it, and you'll see me maybe work around it a little bit. So what I'll do is I'll extrude, and then I could just hit R, or to scale it, or I could extrude and use offset. and that would do a similar job, not quite the same. The really big difference between scaling and offsetting is when you have odd shapes. So if I have an L-shaped selection, extruding it and scaling it would be a bad idea because it'll pull it to its center, which causes an overlap. That's not what I want. Whereas if I have an L shape and I extrude it and then offset it, notice how, and I can hold control while I'm sliding that to get small numbers, notice how I get this even perimeter all the way around, so I get this even setup, which I could then extrude further and make some changes to it. So there is a bit of difference there between scaling and offsetting, but if it's a square selection or a circular selection, scaling will work just the same. Translating is, again, a little bit of different. If I extrude this polygon, I can translate using the manipulator that comes with it, and that's the same as local translate Z, you can see right here in the channel box. Or I could simply select that polygon and hit W and move it as a poly tweak. It'll show up as a poly tweak. So that works as well. The transform component tool. So if I have a multi-selection and I choose to extrude it and then say I offset it a little bit, and let's say I deselect it, maybe later on I want to move those again. On a flat plane, it's just as easy for me to hit W and just translate them all and they all move individually. But what if it wasn't a flat plane? Let's say it was a torus, and I wanted each polygon to move relative to its normal. Well, that's where the transform component tool comes in handy. So again, let's say I have a separated selection here, and I extrude it, and let's say I offset it, but I deselect it and I come back to it later. Like I didn't do it right away. So I'm going to select it again. And so translating W really isn't going to help me. And also, you may be thinking, well, what about normals average? Well, that sounds like a good idea too, but it's the average of all of these normals. I want to move each polygon in its own normal space, and that's where this tool comes in handy. Transform component. And now it looks like the same gizmo that comes with extrude because it is the same tool that comes with extrude. So when you run an extrusion, it's actually adding the transform component tool in addition to it right after you execute the extrusion. So now I'm able to translate each polygon according to its local normal. And there's a couple more features in transforming components that I want to point out for the transform component tool. If I undock this menu, right here at the top is this check mark called Keep Faces Together, and this is a very important one. Most of the time it's going to be check marked, but sometimes you may want to turn this off so that you can individuate each polygon that you select. So instead of having to force a space between each selection by selecting them apart, you could create gaps between them when you tell it not to keep the faces together when you extrude. So now I've extruded each one individually instead of as a unit. Now, when you combine that with the transform component tool, or if you take a look at the inputs of the poly extrude, right down here, there's this random value. Well, there happens to be something similar in the transform component tool. If I open the option box for that, it's its only option, its only setting for the transform component is this random value. So if I hit apply, I get very little happening. But if I increase or decrease this random value, and I'll use the virtual slider to do that, notice I get a perturbation of the surface or of each polygon based on how much I've translated it. So if I increase the local Z, which is the same as moving it along its polynormal, and I have a random value of 1, which is its maximum value. At least I think it's its maximum value. No, apparently it's not its maximum value. I could increase it even higher. So I can greatly distort this object. So let's apply it to something else, like a sphere, for example. And let's select all of the vertices. And use transform component. I'll just click it. And here in the input for this attribute, I will enter a value of 1. And then run the virtual slider on the locate translate z. So I could create some, I don't know, some weird organic cellular things, I suppose. Very basic type of randomization. I think it's a very common kind. I don't really have a name for it, but I've seen this sort of thing before many times, and it's pretty interesting. So if I were to say just trash all of that and select all of the faces and individuate them by keeping keep faces together off, by turning it off, extruding it, and extrusion has that same random value, so I can increase that again to maybe a value of 2, and then change the local translate z and perturb that surface. I've noticed that the extrusion method, you notice how it moves each individual point randomly. So that's kind of hard to keep track of, although that makes an interesting kind of surface in the subdivision surfaces. Let's tuck this off to the side and compare it. Compare it to another one. So if I select, again, all of the faces, and I extrude it again, except instead of using the extrusion operator to run the randomization, I'll use the transform component tool. Let's see if there's a difference. So let's run a value of 1 and translate. So indeed there is a difference. Turning off subdivision surfaces, you can see that the random value in the extrusion moved each point individually, whereas the random value in the transform component moved each polygon individually. So you could probably create some weird natural landscapes, or even a silhouette for some cityscape way off in the distance. Let your mind go wild, I suppose. Okay, that's all I wanted to say on that particular part. Let's get back to it.